Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. The longest government shutdown in U.S. history has come to an end after 43 days, as federal agencies began to reopen and employees returned to work. But airline travel is expected to take some time to get back to normal. China announced that President Xi Jinping will skip this year's Group of 20 summit in South Africa, and that the country's premier will attend instead. This means the summit will be held without the leaders of the world's two largest economies, as U.S. President Donald Trump also announced a boycott. 2 people have been killed and 19 have been injured in Bucheon City, Gyeonggi-do Province, after a truck plowed into crowds at a busy outdoor market. We begin this morning in the United States, where the longest government shutdown in the country's history is now over, after President Donald Trump signed a temporary funding bill on Wednesday. While many federal workers begin to return to work, disruptions to air travel are expected to continue for several days. Our Lee Seung-jae starts us off.
The longest government shutdown in United States history is officially over. U.S. President Donald Trump signed a temporary funding bill on Wednesday night local time after it was passed by Congress, bringing an end to a federal government operations freeze which lasted 43 days. Agencies are now beginning the process of reopening, but a return to normal will not happen overnight. Hundreds of thousands of federal workers are still waiting for back pay, and disruptions to air travel are expected to continue for several days.
Just making sure that my flights leave, depart, and lands on time. I don't get routed somewhere else that I don't want to go. I just want to get home safely.
Some effects could last much longer. National parks face steep revenue losses from weeks without visitors, and taxpayers may experience significant delays on refunds as the Internal Revenue Service works through a heavy backlog. Also, the funding measure signed by President Trump only runs through January 30th, meaning the threat of another shutdown remains on the horizon. For many agencies, the directive to resume operations went out even before the president signed the bill. Meanwhile, many federal workers have begun returning to work. Workers at Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice, the Department of the Interior, and Housing and Urban Development were all told to return to their offices. At the State Department, an email sent Wednesday night informed staff to report the next morning, citing the passage of the short-term resolution. For many, the end of the longest government shutdown in history was welcome news.
I very much look forward to going back to work as soon as possible.
With the government now reopening, officials warned that restoring full operations will take time. Agencies are gearing up to address wide-ranging delays, while millions of Americans wait to feel the effects of federal services coming back online. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
G20 has become one of the most important annual diplomatic events. But this year, for the first time, the leaders of the world's major powers, the United States, China, and Russia, are set to miss out. Our Kim Do-yeon tells us more.
For the first time since G20 was founded in 1999, the leaders of the 3 major superpowers, the United States, China, and Russia, will all be absent from the upcoming summit. The high-profile snubs are casting a shadow over the event in Johannesburg, which is the first ever G20 summit to be hosted on the African continent. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced on Thursday Premier Li Chang will represent President Xi Jinping. However, Beijing emphasized its continued support for the forum.
As the main forum for international economic cooperation, the G20 should strengthen solidarity and cooperation, jointly tackle challenges, improve global economic governance, and make positive contributions to promoting world economic growth and common prosperity.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin, who has an international criminal court arrest warrant issued against him, will also be absent. His delegation will be led by presidential aide Maxim Oreshkin. However, the most significant development is the complete withdrawal of the United States. President Donald Trump declared his non-attendance on social media on November 7th, stating it is truly shameful that the G20 is being held in South Africa. He also said no U.S. representatives would attend. President Trump has repeatedly cited allegations of South Africa's government taking private farmland for public use and violence against white farmers in the country.
Terrible things are happening in South Africa. The leadership is doing some terrible things, horrible things. So that's under investigation right now. We'll make a determination.
The move creates an unprecedented diplomatic situation as the U.S. is the incoming G20 chair and is set to take over the presidency at the summit's conclusion. South Africa has strongly rebutted President Trump's allegations. President Cyril Ramaphosa dismissed the U.S. boycott, stating the G20 will proceed.
The G20 will go. All other heads of state will be. In the end, we will take fundamental decisions, and their absence is their loss.
Other leaders from Argentina and Mexico are also skipping, though European, Brazilian, and Turkish leaders are set to attend. With the three main superpowers absent, concerns are growing that the historic first G20 on African soil has been tarnished before it has even begun. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
In other news, some of the South Korean workers who were part of the group detained in Georgia in September have returned to the United States to resume their work. According to Im Tae-hwan, the president of the Korean American Association of Southeastern Georgia on Thursday, some of the workers returned to Georgia to complete their assignments and encountered no major issues at the airport when entering with their existing B-1 visas. More workers are seeking to obtain the B-1 visa rather than relying on the ESTA visa waiver program, even if the process takes more time. This comes after in September, U.S. immigration authorities arrested and detained more than 300 South Korean workers at the Hyundai Motor Group and LG Energy Solution joint battery plant in Savannah, Georgia. Recent data on South Korea's job market shows a record number of people in their 30s are currently unemployed and not making any effort to find work. There's also a heated debate in South Korea over whether the country should raise the retirement age to 65. For more on the domestic economy, we're joined today by Professor Kim Min-gyun, professor at Seogang Business School. Professor Kim, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So why are so many people in their 30s not making any efforts to find work? What's your assessment of the country's labor market at the moment?
Well, if you look at the overall number for the employment rate, it looks okay because especially it gains because older ages, over 60, because they get a job and they're trying to make money. But if you look at the problems in those numbers, especially for 30s, well, if you look at the 30s, the number of people in 30s where they classify as resting. That means not working or not seeking work. Basically, the number of these people exceed 334,000 in October. Basically, the highest number in 2003. Basically, what they have is, well, they want to work, but basically what they want to work for the jobs, but it's kind of a mismatch between the jobs they want to work for and the jobs they're going to get. So basically where those kind of things will happen in their 30s so that, well, they usually, basically they give up working on their 30s. So where those kind of problems, well, it's going to cause some problems, especially for, well, basically the labor supply and economy. Well, we're looking for the growth all the time, and especially economic perspective. But there are basically the ages that trying to work for 30s, basically. But those kind of mismatch happens. Well, the numbers will still have some problems in our employment rate.
I see. And another very controversial issue in the job market is whether the country should raise the retirement age from 60 to 65. Some say it's needed given the aging population in South Korea, but others say it could take jobs away from younger people. What's your take on this?
Basically, there are pros and cons on this. This perspective. Basically, Korea is becoming the, the old age, basically, where we are getting the old. So, well, the older people, of course, they're trying to work and they're trying to make money, but they are healthy, basically. But the problem is that if they're going to work, well, are they going to take the job for young people? That's kind of the one problem that we're going to have when you're trying to extend our age, I mean, basically the retirement age. So one issue is that, well, if we're going to delay those kind of retirement, then 0.4%, around like 0.4% to 1.5% potential younger hires, basically, they're going to squeeze out. Well, so that, well, eventually, if we're going to extend our retirement age, well, we're going to take the jobs from young people. I think it's kind of like they can expect and we can make a prediction. So what we're trying to do, but if we're going to extend our retirement age, where we're trying to work on the policy for like re-employment contracts, or basically, well, we're trying to work on those kind of policy, and we're trying to find some ideas so that we can increase the opportunity for hiring for younger people, so that we can minimize those kind of damages in our labor market.
I see. And while that's happening, the Korean currency, the Korean won, is now approaching its weakest level since the global financial crisis struck more than 16 years ago, and housing prices are still surging. How might the current economic situation affect the Bank of Korea's decision on interest rates later this month?
Well, basically, I think the approach for the Bank of Korea is basically being very cautious. Well, so a lot of economists expect that on November, where they're going to maintain the steady, like 2.50% in November meetings. Well, we have some issues, of course. If we're going to cut our rate, especially in Korea, well, first of all, of course, there's an importing inflation and the asset price, including the real estate bubbles. And those kind of the issues will come up. Well, but one of the issues that we always looking for is our household debt. Well, one of the common issues that we're going to have in Korea economy, well, those kind of issues always giving us some trouble, especially when trying to work with those kind of monetary policy. So we have a lot of concerns and we have a lot of issues. So the Bank of Korea is being cautious, and we're going to look at those kind of numbers for the employment, of course, all of the economic stats, and also we're going to look at the U.S. monetary policies, also one of the issues that we're going to look at. So the economy is not it's not going well right now. So I think the Bank of Korea is kind of very cautious for those kind of the monetary policy.
Right. And before I let you go, looking more broadly, gold prices have been surging recently. What's driving the trend?
Basically, the gold price is depending on the uncertainty. Well, even though U.S. government shutdown is kind of over, but we still have some issues, especially for the global economy and, of course, the domestic economy too. So, well, when you're trying to eliminate or when you're trying to minimize those kind of risks, especially for the investment, well, we are going for the safe assets. So gold is kind of one of the safe assets, very popular assets that we trying to make an investment. So basically, what you're trying to do, well, we're expecting that the gold price is going to go up. So, well, and we're going to trying to maintain the balance between the risk and those kind of the hedge on the asset that we're trying to make an investment.
I see. All right, Professor Kim, thank you so much for your time and insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Two people have been killed and 19 people are injured after a one-ton cargo truck crashed in a traditional market in Gyeonggi-do province. The crash occurred at approximately 10:55 a.m. on Thursday morning at the Bucheon Jail Market in Wonjong-dong. According to authorities, the truck, driven by a man in his 60s, suddenly sped down a narrow market alley. Two women, one in her 60s and another in her 70s, were killed. Witnesses say the vehicle overturned stalls and struck pedestrians before crashing into a store after reportedly traveling about 150 meters. The driver has been identified as a shop owner who operates a business within the same market. And staying on the domestic front, over 500,000 test takers, mostly high school seniors, took the annual college entrance exam yesterday. After 9 hours of testing that could determine their future paths, many are now ready to finally enjoy a bit of freedom. Our An Sung-jin was at one of the test sites to hear from some of them.
The long journey has come to an end. As students began to pour out after the 9-hour marathon national college entrance exam, also known as the Suneung, some had expressions of excitement on their faces, while some looked worried as friends and families greeted them.
It was a bit more difficult than what I practiced with, so I was a bit startled, but at least I'm done with it. I want to travel abroad or use the test paper discounts to have fun.
I want to allow myself to have a lot of rest.
I think I did fine in the morning, but I'm not sure about the afternoon. I just want to go home and sleep, though I still have an interview to prepare for.
For many students here in South Korea, having a good score in the Suneung is something to strive for, as it could decide their next steps in life. This year, more than 550,000 students took the test at nearly 1,300 test centers across the nation. The number of test takers for this year was the highest in 7 years, though the number of those retaking the exam was slightly decreased, partly due to the reversal of plans to expand the medical school quota. To properly assess test takers' knowledge in line with the public education curriculum, the exam committee ensured a balanced distribution of questions with appropriate difficulty.
We excluded questions that would favor those trained in private education and focused on core and fundamental elements of the public school education.
A team of on-site teachers evaluated that this year's exam would have likely been perceived as slightly more challenging compared to last year's, as questions designed to differentiate top-performing students were somewhat more difficult. As the sun set on this year's Suneung Day, the students of 2025 have truly earned their rest after a series of subjects, starting off with Korean language, continuing through with math, English, and elective subjects. For many, the day marked not just the end of an exam, but the beginning of a new chapter, a well-earned rest after years of effort. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
We now turn to the National Assembly, where lawmakers in South Korea cleared a busy agenda, passing numerous bills while preparing for high-profile votes and important legislation later this month. Our political correspondent Moon Il-yeon reports.
Lawmakers in South Korea wrapped up a packed parliamentary session on Thursday, moving swiftly through a slate of non-controversial bills while also reporting a high-profile arrest motion. More than 50 livelihood-related bills were passed in roughly 2 hours, following an agreement reached between the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party before the session. Among the bills were education-related measures, including stronger penalties for university admissions officers who fail to step aside when conflicts of interest arise, amendments to the Last Mile Logistics Industry Development Act, which strengthens protection for delivery workers, and changes to the Motor Vehicle Management Act aimed at preventing electric vehicle fires. The motion to arrest People Power Party lawmaker Chu Kyung-ho was also reported during today's session. He has been accused of obstructing last December's parliamentary vote to lift the emergency martial law order, and in response, Chu is calling the investigation politically motivated. The next plenary session is scheduled for the 27th, where lawmakers will vote on the arrest motion for former PPP floor leader Chu Kyung-ho and finalize negotiations on fast-track bills still pending agreement. These fast-track bills include a new act aimed at strengthening the competitiveness of South Korea's semiconductor industry, which establishes a related committee under the president, as well as amendments to an act guaranteeing the right of franchises to collective bargaining. Fast-track designation allows urgent bills to skip normal committee reviews and go straight to a plenary session for a vote. Thursday's plenary session also included appointments to the Nuclear Safety and Security Commission, recommended by the People Power Party and the Speaker of the National Assembly. Other appointments requiring parliamentary approval, such as those to the Anti-Corruption and Civil Rights Commission, National Education Commission, and Human Rights Commission, will be addressed at the session later this month. 문혜령, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In the UK, the BBC has issued an apology to US President Donald Trump for an edited panorama segment that wrongly made his 2021 speech appear to urge violence. The broadcaster said on Thursday the splice was unintentional and that it has withdrawn the 2024 program, but it is refusing Trump's demand for compensation. Trump's lawyers are seeking a retraction, an apology, and $1 billion in damages, accusing the BBC of misleading viewers. The dispute grew this week after a second edited clip was revealed, this time from a 2022 Newsnight broadcast. Iran is facing its worst water crisis in decades, and more than 10 million people in Tehran could face rationing and even evacuation. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian said last week that if it does not rain by December, his government must begin rationing in the capital, and if the drought persists, quote, they have to evacuate Tehran. Officials say the crisis follows a dry, scorching summer and decades of mismanagement and overconsumption. Tehran's reservoirs are now at roughly half capacity, and at current usage, water could run out within 2 weeks. Blue Origin, the rocket company founded by Jeff Bezos, has launched its New Glenn rocket on a major test mission for NASA's Escapade Mars project. The rocket lifted off from Cape Canaveral, Florida on Thursday afternoon, carrying twin satellites that will eventually head for orbit around Mars. It was New Glenn's first flight carrying a customer's payload, and for the first time, Blue Origin landed the rocket's first stage booster on a barge at sea. Blue Origin says recovering and reusing the booster is key to cutting launch costs and competing with SpaceX. The musician Sting will once again be an Englishman in New York as he revives his musical The Last Ship for a 9-performance run at the Metropolitan Opera House from June 9th to the 14th, 2026. The 2014 Broadway show, based on his childhood in an English shipbuilding community, returns with Sting in the lead and also features reggae musician Shaggy.
Korea is enjoying beautiful late autumn weather with fallen leaves and sunshine. It was a bit dusty in many parts yesterday, but it was an overall fine late autumn Suneung test day. Again, temperatures will climb nicely this afternoon, but we're looking at a dramatic cold snap looming for next week. Temperatures are set to drop to just -3 degrees Celsius here in the capital on Tuesday morning here in Seoul. But again, it's going to be warmer than normal this afternoon, topping out at 14 degrees Celsius here in Seoul. Daejeon will be at 15 degrees, Daegu, Gwangdo topping out at 16 degrees under sunny skies nationwide today. Now back to next week's winter chill. Sunday's rain in central areas in Jeollado will bring a significant plunge in temperatures, with snow forecast for Chungcheongdo and Jeollado provinces early next week. But don't worry, we are not jumping right into the winter, with temperatures returning to near average at the end of the week. But it is time to take out those heavy winter coats this weekend.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.